Hi, I'm Randy Simmons for Eye on Arts, and I have a very special guest today. I have David Leonardis from Chicago. David's here with us to talk about the Howard Finster show that's exhibiting nationally on a touring exhibit, I believe. And I'm very proud to introduce David as our guest today. And so David, you're the curator for the Howard Finster Vision House Museum, and you also have your own gallery in Chicago, which is soon to be the Howard Finster Vision House Chicago.
That's correct.
Museum as well. So tell us, what are you doing with Howard Finster's artwork?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here on Eye on Arts. It's a pleasure. And the Howard Finster Vision House Museum is the actual house where Howard Finster had his vision from God to paint sacred art. Howard Finster was a retired Southern Baptist preacher who had a vision from God to paint sacred art on his finger while he was painting a bicycle. And the face formed, or the paint formed a face on his finger and told him to create sacred art. And Howard Finster said that he couldn't do that, only professionals could do that. And the voice said to him in an ever-increasing tone, "How do you know, how do you know, how do you know?" So he pulls out George Washington from his pocket because he didn't have Ben Franklin. He was a humble man. And he painted George Washington. And he thought to himself, well, maybe I can do this. Later that night, in my backyard, he sees the 10-foot-tall ghost of Elvis Presley. And Elvis tells him, well, you might want to paint that sacred art. So he agrees with God. He's going to make 5,000 pieces of art for God. And he had a good amount of success. The REM Reckoning album cover was done in about his 2000 period, and he did the Talking Heads Little Creatures album,
yes,
which was number 4,411. So he gets to 5,000, and he takes the weekend off and thinks about it and says, okay, well, I've had a good amount of success, and I'm going to make another 5,000 pieces of art for God. So he gets to 10,000 pieces just about the end of January 1989, takes the weekend off, thinks about it, and he says, well, I'm still the Reverend Howard Finster, but I am going to up the production. So I still want to save people's souls, and now I'm going to really get the art out through the messages. And from 1976 to 1985, he made 5,000 pieces of art. From 1985 to the end of 1989, 10,000 pieces, or he got to 10,000 pieces of art. From 1989 to when he died in October 2001, he had gotten to just shy of 47,000
wow,
pieces of art, right up there with Picasso and another artist friend of mine, Matt Lamb. So Howard Finster was a man that had a 6th grade education, and he was smart enough to be able to take the icons of the popular culture and the icons of Christianity and blend them. And so while you're looking at very cool contemporary folk art, what you're really doing is talking about God. And so I had the opportunity to buy Howard Finster's house, and it seemed like a no-brainer if that was the exact spot where God himself visited Howard Finster.
Sure. Hence the name of
hence the Howard Finster Vision House, and he's widely known and respected throughout the world, and people believe Howard Finster, and I certainly believe my old friend. As I like to say, Howard's job is to save your soul, and my job is to sell you the valuable contemporary folk art. Howard helps me do my job, and I help him do his. And so there at the museum, after extensive renovations, we have a good portion of it open. We're not fully done. We have about 300 pieces of art on exhibit there, permanent exhibit, and that's for the people to come and enjoy and learn about Howard Finster. There is a adjoining museum project, which is called the Paradise Gardens, which was recently purchased by Chattooga County, which is the county there in Somerville, Georgia. And Howard Finster, known also for his art, but his 2.5-acre environmental installation, the Paradise Gardens. And so there is a brick path coming out of my basement to the fence that is the original entrance to the Paradise Gardens. And if you'll see the REM Reckoning poster, there's the Snake Mountain.
Yes,
it's
I
about
remember
6
that.
feet tall, and concrete mountain with hand-formed snakes all over it, really detailed, very fantastic. There's concrete pathways with ceramics and glass. He built a Coca-Cola bottle house, and it's a little house made out of Coca-Cola bottles, which is really neat. And then more into the garden is the World's Folk Art Church. And this was a old kind of ranch style church. And then on top of that, Howard built a 2-tier birthday cake church. And I know one of the stories is that there was an architect that he was upset when Howard told him that the plans just came to him. Mm-hmm. And he said, there's no way. And Howard's like, well, yeah, there is a way. And God told me how to make this octagonal birthday cake church, and that's what he did. And so it's a fantastic installation there between our two museums. And it's my goal to continue to renovate the property to the point where we'll have a bed and breakfast available. I'd also like an artist retreat going on where an artist can come and stay there, make some art, maybe do a little work on the garden, and learn more about Howard Finster, and then give back themselves a little bit.
So how did you meet Howard Finster?
I had seen Howard Finster's art at an art gallery in 1989, and I was really impressed with the whole situation. The artist was a pop artist that was running the gallery, and then there was Howard Finster's art there, and I walked in, and there's just this entire wall of Howard Finster's, and there was all these different images, and they worked well together. And again, the icons of popular culture, the icons of Christianity. He liked animals, and he had it all together, and with his wonderful messages. And they weren't cheap back then. And I just thought to myself, this is a really cool thing, and I'd really like to be involved. And I couldn't really afford to buy outright a Howard Finster piece. I had just gotten out of college, and so I got a job at the art gallery. And so I started working for art, and eventually I, through some connections in the art world, got a hold of Howard Finster himself. And at that point, I was working as a waiter, and I would eat on the job and spend all of my money on Howard Finsters. All of a sudden, I had like 200 Howard Finsters, and I told Howard Finster I would like to, after I called him up, that I'd like to make Howard Finster t-shirts, and he thought that was a great idea, and we picked an image, and I made a call to the High Museum in Atlanta and the Whitney Museum in New York City, and they bought some, and Howard wanted some, so I brought my t-shirts on down there to meet Howard Finster, and charming man. I think it was described that he just wasn't suffering any fools. And Howard Finster, he was quite serious about his job. Like I say, it's his job to save your soul, and he's doing that through the art. But a man, a grandfather, a husband, and a parent, and he welcomed me into it. And I remember I was buying some art, I was giving him some t-shirts, we were bartering for some t-shirts, and he gave me a few pieces, and he said, well, this is to help you out with your work and get started. And I was hooked.
Wow, so you've really sunk a lot of your life into Howard Finster.
I guess I'm getting older as the days go by, but yeah, 1989, and here we are in 2012, so I've absolutely... it was the kind of situation where I never bought a Howard Finster that I couldn't sell for more. And being in the art business, it's the art business, and so you have to learn to buy and sell. And sometimes with art, you're certainly taking a risk. if you're going to buy it and your plan is to resell it. But with Howard Finster, that risk was eliminated, and it was a way to make a living, and make a living doing something that I enjoyed, and moreover, working with someone that I enjoyed working with.
Now, he passed away in 2001.
He did. Strange thing, you know, I worked with Howard Finster from about 1990 till his death there in 2001. And for some reason, it was right after 9/11, and I wanted to go and see what my old friend Howard Finster had to say. And I road tripped on down there, the 650 miles it is from Chicago, and Mrs. Finster brought me into his room and said, Howard, David Leonardo's here to see your old friend David Leonardo. Of course, it's David Leonardis, but you don't correct Mrs. Finster when her husband is lying on his deathbed. And not to be melodramatic or anything, Randy, or the people out there, but death was hovering over the Reverend Howard Finster, and you could feel it. I could see it, and I guess my mom would say the legions of angels were ready to carry Howard Finster off to his next destination. And walked over to Howard and said hello, and he said, well, I'm not feeling so good, but you go get some food out of the icebox. And truly, that's the kind of man that Howard Finster was, is he was giving until the day he died.
Wow.
And so we let Howard rest and had some Coca-Cola with Mrs. Finster in the kitchen. And hours later, really later that night, he died.
Wow. So how has Howard's artwork changed the world, and what kind of artwork would you describe his work as?
I would describe Howard Finster as the grandfather of contemporary American folk art. Certainly there's a lot of anonymous folk art that,
Right.
1950, and Howard, when he had his vision from God, that was in 1976, and he really started a movement. There's many other folk artists out there, from Bill Traylor to Mose Tolliver and Jimmy Lee Sudduth and scores of other artists. And then more artists after that got involved in untrained art, and I would say they were definitely influenced by Howard Finster.
So would you say that Howard has a worldwide following?
Absolutely. Howard Finster's art has been shown in the Venice Biennale, and I personally have a relationship with the artist Matt Lamb that has international art museums, and I shipped 22 Howard Finster pieces to Berlin, Germany, and also to Buenos Aires.
Wow. Now, you said he's created thousands of pieces
just shy
of art.
Of 47,000 pieces of original art, and that doesn't include all of the silkscreen prints. And I published from 1990 to 2000 36 signed limited edition prints of 100 or less with Howard Finster, a couple of photo editions with Howard as well. And there are certainly other publishers out there, but I remember Howard looking at my art, and he was pleased, and he said that I had published the most Howard Finster prints, and that if anyone's soul ever got saved because of one of my Howard Finster prints, that I was going to get the extra credit point in heaven. And I'm just a garden variety sinner, so I'll take what I can get.
So have you sold Finster's work to any celebrities?
Celebrities. Joe Piscopo has one. That's a celebrity in particular.
Sure.
Different, really art world celebrities. Christopher Makos. I know I had a conversation with Gina Gershon at the Julian Schnabel opening, and I was talking to David Bowie and Laurie Anderson, and Gina Gershon was there, and she's a Howard Finster collector. And I know that there's a letter from George Bush that he has one, George Bush the senior. And, there's 47,000 Howard Finster pieces out there, just shy of. And so certainly there's many other art dealers out there, and I would imagine there's quite a few celebrities out there that have his work, and as well as regular old people.
That's pretty impressive. Now, if I remember correctly, REM shot a video at the Vision House?
Absolutely. Well, that was shot actually at the Paradise Gardens before the Howard Finster Vision House came together in that name. And, Michael Stipe is a Howard Finster collector. Also David Byrne with the Talking Heads Little Creatures album. He has that painting in his own private collection. And I remember when I met David Byrne in New York that I gave him a Howard Finster print that I had handy and told him that it was the least that I could do, that I had Howard sign many, many Talking Heads Little Creatures albums and posters and had sold them. And so it was the least I could do for David Byrne. But the REM video was Radio Free Europe. And that was their very first video. And REM truly, really brought Howard Finster into the collection, or into the consciousness of the youth and the more hip rocker group and the people that like the rockers. And Howard was, again, this humble country preacher, and he was smart enough to let the rockers use his images to get his message out, and the rockers were smart enough to let Howard Finster's images be on their album covers, and he was getting their images out as well.
Impressive. I mean, I'm thinking that's a lot I couldn't imagine making that many paintings and to have such a clientele, such a fan base.
Howard Finster, I would road trip from Chicago and we'd be hanging out, and he'd have a big stack of Howard Finster prints there, and he'd be signing them. I'd flip the prints and he'd sign them, and every once in a while I'd kind of, my arm. He goes, well, I think I made about 25,000 more pieces of art than I should have. Then, my arm could have, but kind of like with my Howard Finster Vision House Museum, it's my pleasure to create this museum and restore his home and make that available for people to come. And I think that that's how Howard Finster felt, that it was his pleasure to devote his life to God and making all of that art and making that environment. And again, you're talking about art, you're going to the cool environment, but really Howard's goal was that you wind up talking about God.
So do you have a lot of support from his family right now since his death?
Sure, absolutely. In particular, Howard Finster's grandson, Andy Wilson, helps out quite a bit over there at the Vision House, and he also works running the Paradise Gardens, and he'll send me visitors, and as well he'll come on over and do some physical labor. In the museum, I also have a collection of Howard Finster's family members that are artists. And Michael Finster is Howard Finster's grandson as well, and he is Roy Finster's son, and Roy Finster is Howard Finster's only son. And so in the collection we have Roy Finster's, Michael Finster's, Alan Wilson is Howard Finster's grandson as well, and he makes the wood burn molding that we frame a lot of the Howard Finster.
Right, I saw those
prints in, and Howard Finster designed the wood burn molding in the 1960s. He used to make clocks and baby doll furniture, and while that's art, that was before he had his specific vision from God to create sacred art. Humble country preacher up there in Northwest Georgia, gotta feed the family, and so he was making clocks, baby doll furniture, bottles out of wood, all sorts of things. And so Alan has really carried that legacy on to continue making that. Thelma Finster Bradshaw, I have a piece. Maddie Brown. Yeah, so it's been real nice. I think that, I've been going down there for so long. I remember Andy Wilson made me a honorary Wilson brother, and
Great.
This was their grandfather. They grew up around this environment, and it was certainly the elements down there in Northwest Georgia. It's like a tropical jungle. I mean, I have these 70-foot pine trees. And not too long ago, we had the tornado came booking in between my two houses there and chopped the pine tree in half and sent it flying on the Paradise Gardens fence. And so there's just constantly this major work that's involved in upkeeping the Howard Finster Vision House and the Paradise Gardens. And I remember there was an article that described Howard as the diminutive country preacher, and it would be interesting to see if I could even come close to his physical efforts, and the answer is no, and I've had a lot of help. And Howard Finster, the man was truly inspired by God from a young age. Howard says that he got saved at the age 13, and then the first person that he saved was his father, and so he spent his life working with and for God, I'm sure he would say, and just filled with this incredible energy. I mean, when you describe the Snake Mountain that I'm talking about, I had the experience of making a 8-foot by 4-foot by 4-inch thick concrete walkway that we needed off of our front sidewalk, and you start schlepping around 80-pound bags of concrete and mix them up and then schlepping them over to where they're going in there. And I mean, I was beat. And Howard Finster, he worked night and day on the Paradise Gardens. He had cut down vines. It's very interesting down there. I'm a city boy, and I go down there and I get to do I call it the jungle work. And there are these vines that grow all over. And I remember reading about that before I really understood it. And I just describe it as Olympic vine wrestling, because you're down there and you're trying to pull these vines down and cut them. And, God bless Mother Nature, but, we'd like to have our own little environment that we can work with to enjoy and not have to constantly be tripping over vines and everything. And just the physical effort that was put forth by a 5'5" country preacher is just really, really an incredible testament to his commitment, interest, and I would say the power of God put into Howard Finster.
I've been dying to ask this question.
Okay.
You have the Vision House, and you've stayed in the Vision House. Have you had a vision?
Have I had a vision? That's interesting. Well, I guess, when I saw the Howard Finster Vision House, the weeds had grown up all in front of it. You couldn't even really see. And my vision for the Howard Finster Vision House was that it would be a fantastic museum and bed and breakfast and artist retreat for people to come and to enjoy Howard Finster's messages. I think you're asking a little bit more about the supernatural, and kind of the thing about buying a house where God is widely known to have visited. You're probably not going to be too surprised when there's a ghost there. And we had a professor of religion from Lehigh University. He wasn't a priest. Norman Gerardo had led a class of his students he teaches a class that Howard Finster figures into, prominently talking about folk art and whatnot. And so he wanted to bring them all down there and build the multi-ton sculpture, and worked with Howard on that. And I remember Norman telling me that Howard was quite proud of what he had done. And so Norman was doing a book on Howard Finster, and he wanted to interview me at the house. This was a year and a half or so ago. And so I said, well, okay, and I'd like to interview you for my TV show in Chicago, Chit Chat with David Leonardis. And so we sat him down, and, he went on to talk about, the supernatural and how that figures into religion and this and that. And my cameraman at the time, and I like to describe him as my tough rock and roll electrician, artist friend, and he was we now call it the hot spot or the ghost room. And he was sleeping in this ghost room, and it's like 5 a.m, and he wakes up screaming, "Dave, Dave, Dave." And so I come over from the caretaker apartment at the time, and he tells me, and she's walking around all night long, and there's a sewing machine right over there. And my friend, my tough friend, he was visibly shaken. And so after that, I said, okay, well, why don't we call the paranormal investigators? And you Google it up, and if you have a ghost in your house, these people will show up. They're not there to charge you. They're there to look around for a ghost. And we called 6 different paranormal investigation teams, and 5 of them are dead certain that there is a ghost there in the house. And that's absolutely nothing that I am searching out. There's a ghost in the house, so that's something I have to deal with. It's an obstacle. You overcome the obstacle. I can't have the people waking up screaming all the time. And so it turned out that over this past summer, I've now hired a full-time caretaker at the museum.
Right.
And so Robert's in the caretaker apartment, and I had a guest actually that helped set up the exhibit in Paducah. And so she was in, we call it the frosting room, and there I was left having to sleep in the hot spot, the ghost room, for the first time. And you're going to have to tune in to Paranormal Museum number 6 when I reveal what happened, but I was a little alarmed myself.
Wow, that's a great segue there. We've got about a minute left, so what's in the future for Howard Finster's exhibitions?
Well, I'm looking to book the touring exhibition on the road somewhere else. I'd love to bring it to California. I'd love to really bring it anywhere that's interested. We had it in Long Grove, Illinois. We have it here in Paducah. Both have been fantastic exhibits and have had really wonderful response. I have the Howard Finster Vision House, Chicago, and I'm looking to add another permanent location and tour it around. So, as with most things, Howard Finster, I've always had fantastic luck, and things just sort of happen. So while I'm not sure what the next step for the touring exhibit is, I am looking forward to selling some more art for Howard Finster in Chicago, and we'll just take it from there.
Fantastic. I think Howard Finster will be very proud of you and what you've done with his work.
Thank you so very much. And I've had a fantastic trip here in Paducah, and the community seems to be supportive and interested. Thank you very much, Randy.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
All right.
Hey, thanks so much for being here with us for the Eye on Arts program. I'm your host, Randy Simmons, and I believe that wraps up another session. Thanks for joining us.